Welcome, Generals, is back to another Scourge of Ghyran update. And if you're just joining us now, thank you so much. Essentially, Games Workshop put out a little two-page, or is putting out a two-page update to each and every Age of Sigmar army as its own faction expansion pack, I guess you could say, for the upcoming General's Handbook season, Scourge of Ghyran. And today we are talking about the Gloomspie Gitz, who had a recent addition to their army in the form of the Git mob units that are really sweet looking. And so we're going to be exploring the new rules that are featuring the Gloomspie Gitz for this coming season, as well as just have a little discussion surrounding them. Games Workshop was kind enough to send me an advanced copy of the rules to see, but they asked that I not do a screen share. So I put together a very simple slideshow, and I'm just going to be reading the rules to you. This is an entirely audio medium format, so go ahead and grab your paintbrushes, settle in, and let's talk about the little man who stabs at your shins. So who are the Gloomspie Gitz? In a word, goblins. Mean, evil goblins. They live all throughout the mountains and the hills of the mortal realms, and they come in a few different strains depending on the environment that they've sort of adapted to. You have the Moon Clan Grots, who have adapted to living in deep caves and underground networks, kind of using the natural flora and fauna as weapons, poisons, squigs, and all those kinds of things. And then you have your Git mob, which are sort of the above ground grots who adapted to life in forests and stuff like that. There's also Spider Fang, who kind of got used to living around spiders, as you might expect. And the army also has a whole bunch of trogs, so think trolls, like bridge trolls kind of a thing, because these are more creatures, again, that live underground. They all have their own mythos for the sun and the moon, but they really are the defining characteristics of this faction. The Moon Clan Grots revere a celestial entity known as the Bad Moon, and when the Bad Moon appears, hell comes with it. There's actually a wonderful book, I think it's just called Moon Clan, if I'm not mistaken. Someone correct me in the notes. What is the name of the book where you follow the party and it's as the bad moon is coming up? Actually, it's just called Gloomspite, now that I think about it. Wonderful book. It's crazy when this thing comes. And the other side of it that's been kind of introduced to us is the idea that there's this Glareface Frazzlegit. It's basically the demon of the sun who scares away all the night goblins. Now, on the table, they have always been a very interesting faction because when they were first previewed, they were shown as very distinct. Like you had synergies based around Moon Clan stuff, based around Spider Fang, and then the Trogs and Troggeths. And then over the course of editions, they've kind of been getting better and better at blending these things together a smidge. But common lists that you will see for Gloomspite Gitz are things that feature either a lot of hordes, meaning lots of shootas, stabas, running up to objectives. Squigs are always popular because, good or bad, they are fun. As well as, your beefcake trogs coming in for the killing blow. Lots of great attacks on those profiles and ways of kind of buffing them up. So, what do our illustrious grots get in this little update for Scourge of Ghyran? Well, one of my favorite things is they get some new battle formations. The first one is called the Sunbiter Pack, and their ability happens any combat phase, once per turn, and you pick up to 3 friendly Git mob units that charged this turn to be the targets, add 1 to the rend characteristic of companion weapons used by the targets for the rest of the turn. Now, my understanding was the designers here wanted a way to kind of make the Git mob stuff more effective, those new wolf riders and the chariots and that kind of stuff, without making them seem suffocating. So the real throttling limit here is that there's only 3 per turn that can benefit from this. That said, +1 rend is a fantastic ability. And the other one is called the Gittish Tide, which I accidentally wrote the ability rule is called Grots upon Grots there. This is once per turn at the end of any turn. Pick a friendly non-squig Moon Clan unit that is contesting an objective to be the target. Add 1 to the control score of the target unit for each model in that unit that is not contesting any objectives. What this is essentially saying is that this mob controls this objective with almost no questions asked, right? This is a way to manipulate your control value so that you can get a unit of grots on there and really make your opponent work to take it away from you. Which for objective play, again, since these are not just a narrative expansion, these are for the General's Handbook and ostensibly the competitive side of things, I do think that that is a very good ability, or at least very compelling. So we got 2 battle formations that I think are interesting. The Sunbiter pack one a little less so. I mean, If you had an army that was based around Git mob stuff, you'd be stoked, and I would be stoked for you. I mostly just look at this in terms of the turn over turn. How am I using this? How does it get me forward in my goals? And for that, the Gittish Tide is fantastic. Now, they do get a new spell lore, the first of these little faction packs to get one. And I want to remind you here that while you can select, for example, one of these battle formations or one artifact from one of the other ones, you still have to lock yourself into the entire lore when you choose spells. So this introduces one option called the Lore of Frazzlegit. We got 3 spells, of course. First one being Bright Fright. Goes off on a 6. Pick a friendly Gloomspite Gitz wizard to cast the spell. Pick up to 3 friendly visible Gloomspite Gitz units wholly within 12 inches of them to be the targets, and then make a casting roll of 2d6. Each target can immediately use a retreat ability as if it was your movement phase. No mortal wounds are inflicted as a result of those retreat abilities. This is their unlimited spell. They can always back out. Downside is, that's a pretty small bubble for your Gloomspite Git wizard to be up there. However, being able to retreat out of combat during your hero phase has an immense amount of utility. From everything from literal model placement, where people go across the board, because you can use that to pull them off in a singular direction, and then during their move phase, move further in that direction. All of a sudden, they were in combat, and now they're on an objective. Or if your ability is based on like extra damage on the charge, like some kind of cavalry stuff is, pulling them out, charging them right back in is great. So I find that compelling. Maybe not the most exciting unlimited spell, but it is cool. And the next one here is Git Speed. Pick a friendly Gloomspite Gitz wizard to cast the spell, and then make a casting roll of 2d6. Again, this one goes off on a 6, and the effect is until the start of your next turn, add 2 inches to the move characteristic of friendly non-Troggoth Gloomspite Gitz units while they're wholly within 12 inches of this unit. And I kind of like this one because it functionally makes whatever character casts this a beacon of speed. So you could have it on, I believe there's a Chariot Rider mode where he can do that, and then you can have all your wolves move aggressively fast. Or it could just be a delivery system to get your horde of Stabbas onto an objective. Again, anything except Troggoths, which means, you know, your random values for your squigs get +2. That's cool too. It just seems like there's a lot of utility in this particular one. And the last spell, the Lore of Frazzlegit, is called Gaze of Glareface. Goes off on a 6. You pick a friendly wizard, pick a visible enemy unit within 18 inches of them to be the target, and make your casting roll. The effect, until the start of your next turn, the target cannot use run abilities and have the range characteristic of the target's ranged weapons. That's brutal. This is the kind of thing, if you have a wizard that can move fast, hustle in really any capacity, getting up to be within 18 inches of a shooting unit is not terribly difficult. You know, you can kind of come at them on the side or the flank, but having the range of their attacks is incredible. I wish I had this spell when I was playing, was it Skaven in my last round of Holy Havoc? Oh, it was an absolute delight. It would have been great. Just Zales with half range. Oh, I'll do anything for it. I love it. Now, one thing I can tell about this lore, just kind of stepping back. First of all, not a single one of these things does damage to the enemy. This is about control, which I think adds an interesting new dimension to the Gloomspite for this coming season. Retreating out of combat without wounds in the hero phase, excellent. Shutting down run abilities and having range characteristics, stellar. +2 speed. Man, I played Beasts of Chaos. That was my bread and butter. All in all, I rate Lore of Frazzlegit pretty highly, especially if you're also going to bring in something like an Endless Spell lore that does damage, where you're not missing out on something like that. I think it has a lot of play. Now, we do also get 2 new War Scrolls, but they're really focused on one kit. The Loon Smasher Fanatics. Okay, these guys are incredible. Let me just go through this, okay? First of all, move 2d6. Classic. They have a 6-up save, 1 control, and 1 health. Their melee weapon is the ball and chain, 3 attacks, 4s to hit, 3s to wound, 2 rend, and d3 damage. Deployment phase, Lost in the Horde. Pick this unit if it's not been deployed yet. You can set up this unit in reserve. Lost in the Horde. The unit has now been deployed. So you can basically hide it in a unit of Moonclan Grots. And then once per turn, army-wide, in any charge phase, Whirling Destruction. This is the cool one. Pick this unit if it is lost in the Horde. Effect, set this unit up anywhere on the battlefield, wholly within 3 inches of a friendly Moonclan Stabas or Shootas unit. Then, this unit can move 2d6. It can pass through enemy models and their combat ranges and can end that move in combat. Then, roll a dice for each enemy unit in combat with this unit or that was passed across by this unit in part of that move. Inflict a amount of mortal damage on that unit equal to the roll. The keywords here are core, move, and charge. But there's a lot of text going on here. What this essentially means, it's kind of the old school Fantasy Battles ability where you can now intercept a charge. So you have your big thing of Stabas, some opponent in the charge phase is nearby. Now again, your opponent does all their abilities first, but what this allows you to do is when it's your turn, pop out your Loon Smashes and then rocket them towards an enemy in the charge phase. Before we even get to attacks, they are able to potentially launch themselves forward and do some mortal wounds. And now they're engaged with the enemy so that hopefully the math has turned on your opponent's plans. Or if there's a unit that didn't get charged that maybe your opponent probably should have charged, they can now project like a missile this little Loon Smasher to hopefully go shoot something in the backfield. I find it highly interesting, and I'm so curious to see how this turns out. It doesn't have quite the same reaction ability like it used to have, where your opponent would basically, I'm going to charge you, and then everything would stop, and then you get to have your Loon Smashes go out and try to like run ahead of your unit to intercept them. But it's pretty close. And I think certainly harkens back to a lot of that fun. Our second option here is going to be the Spore Splatter Fanatics. Again, it's the same kit, but these ones are like wielding giant mushrooms, and the idea is they're, well, historically they've been kind of like shooting out this giant puffs of smoke to make things harder for your opponent. We have sort of a different idea here, but we'll talk about that. They have the exact same profile, 2d6 move, 6 up save, 1 control, 1 health. These are not your frontline warrior guys. And their melee weapon is the Spore Ball and Chain. Just 2 attacks, 3s to hit, 4s to wound, 1 rend, and d3 damage. So a little bit weaker on the attack. But their passive ability, Choking Spore Clouds. Subtract 1 from attack characteristic of weapons used by enemy units while they are in combat with this unit, which is a phenomenal debuff. You have to deliver them there. They don't have the same, pop out of a unit thing that the others do. But if you can get them there, that's pretty wild. And their second ability, once per turn, army-wide, at the end of any turn. This unit can move 2d6. It can move through the combat ranges of enemy units and finish that move in combat. So this is helping you, again, launch them forward. Because they don't get buried in a unit, at the end of a turn, you can surge them forward to hopefully have a similar kind of effect. Get them into melee, where that debuff can start mattering. This is particularly nice if you can like end your turn with them out in the open, and then you do this, rush forward and tag an opponent. Now they're starting the round, their turn, in combat and with -1 attack. And to kind of finish up here on these profiles, the Loon Smasher Fanatics with the Wrecking Ball are 5 dudes coming in at 110, and they're of course Moonclan infantry. And the Spore Splatter Fanatics are a unit of 5, only costing 7 points. And of course Moonclan and infantry as well. So very affordable on the Spore Splatter ones. The fact that they can give that debuff for so cheap, I don't know, it raises my eyebrow. I'd love to hear your thoughts. So what can we do with some takeaways for the faction here? Well, as I said before in my other videos for this Scourge of Ghyran content, battle formations are my favorite things to be added, just because they're a really important lens with how you start to look at your army, whether it's competitive-wise and they're the fundamental buffs, or narratively, and it's, again, you're kind of figuring out the lens of this story you want to write. Battle formations matter for both of those things. The Sunbiter pack, again, if you are really into the Git mob stuff, there are a lot of folks who just fell in love with the wolf packs. This is for you. On that note, if you do like the wolf packs, I think the Sunbiter pack with the new spell lore together do a lot to really supplement the weaknesses of those particular units. And then Gittish Tide is the Grots upon Grots one. This is the one that I like for competitive play, because competitive play is about taking objectives, and this is going to help you do that with some very cheap and efficient units. The new spell lore is actually one of my favorites, mainly because I like magic to do something that other units in the game don't. So, like, yes, magic missile. It's super cool. It does damage, but I have a lot of options to do damage. We got trogs, we got rock labas, we got dudes shooting themselves up in cannons and flying down. Like, we got ways to do that. What we need is utility, and I do think that the lore of the Frazzle Git adds that in spades. The retreat thing is really cool from the Bright Fright. I don't know how many units you'll actually be able to do that with such a small bubble, 12-inch range, but one or two backing out of combat, getting where they need to be, can be devastating to your opponent's plan. Having that as your unlimited spell is interesting. Actually, the more I think about it, the more highly I rate that. Git speed is wonderful. I love anything that adds movement. Movement is a big part of the game. And Gaze of Glareface is not the spell that I would look at the most, but it's one that I would kind of keep in my pocket. That's your secret weapon. I mean, obviously tell your opponent about it, but you know what I mean? Of just like, if things kind of line up right, my wizard is just enough in range to do this, and it's meaningful, that's a good tool to have in the toolbox. I'll say again, I absolutely adore the new take on the Loon Smasher, or the Fanatics rather, with the Loon Smasher ones popping out of a unit again, functionally being a really interesting counter charge that can do some mortal wounds on the way in, to the Spore Splattas, you know, obviously having much more of a liability as they move up the board, but they are cheap as chips. And when they get up there, they're not going to like wreck stuff. They don't have the best profile. It's basically the old man staff that every small solo wizard has, but the debuffs they add and the things that they can do to get into combat, to tie up enemies in the back end, certainly seem interesting to me. So friends, those are just my thoughts on our new Gloomspite Gitz during the Scourge of Ghyran. I would adore to hear your thoughts. Please tell me in the comments down below. It occurred to me that none of these really necessarily do anything for trogs. However, Troggoths aren't generally like the core of an army. They're usually like an addition. So I do feel like this addresses a lot of the core elements of the army. If you're going to go Git Mob, we got stuff for that. If you're going to go Moon Clan, we got stuff for that as well. I think the spell lore benefits everybody. And the Loon Smasher Fanatics, I just want to see more on the table. That's just, again, it's like the Screaming Bell with the Skaven. It's just such an iconic part of what Games Workshop has made for this particular, their flavor of goblins, that it just has to be there. So let me know your thoughts if you're a Gloomspite Gitz player. I always pin the most helpful comments, so if you have feedback and stuff like that, leave it in the comments down below. I'll pin it up for you. And I look forward to seeing you in my next Scourge of Ghyran video. Thank you so much for watching and listening, and I'll catch you next time. Happy wargaming.